Host More Yelvington of Morph Transform Your Reality, where I help women step out of trauma and reclaim their power. I'm so happy to have you here for this open conversation about moms, sex, motherhood, children, relationships, marriage, and everything in between. So grab your drink of choice and let's dive in.
I'm so honored to have the beautiful Pauli here with me today. Hey, Pauli.
Hi.
So how about you? I mean, I had the honor to spend some time with Pauline. So I would love for her to introduce her. How about you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit who you are and what you do to those of you that don't know you?
Sure. So my name is Pauli, and I am a pelvic floor physical therapist. And I know some don't even know that that's actually a thing, but it is. So I went to physical therapy school just like anyone else did for, the PTs that help you with your knee pain, back pain, that type of a thing. I just decided to focus and really specialize on the pelvic floor. And that's a whole story in itself. But I ended up, and so I should say, I've been doing this job. I've been treating the pelvic floor in men, women, and kids for over 13 years. And a little over 2 years ago, I opened up my own practice. And I did so because I just felt like women needed a lot more help. They need specialized care, and the traditional clinic setting just really wasn't cutting it for them. And so I started my own clinic. It's called Beyond the V Physical Therapy, and it's located here in Utah. But about a year after I opened up my clinic doors, I just really felt a calling to help more women. And I didn't know how, because I'm very lucky, I should say, that I only get to work 2 days a week so I can be home with my babies. And I just thought, well, how do I help more women? Because so many women were struggling, and I had a wait list, and I wanted to be able to help them. I just didn't know how exactly. So I started my online brand of No Kegels University, where I have a bunch of different courses that target or address women's health issues. So that might be leaking. I don't have anything for pain with sex quite yet. It's coming. But a lot of the principles that I teach in some of these courses and programs, the theme carries through. And so there's other courses in there, but today we're talking about sex. So we don't have to talk about any of those particular things, those other issues, I should say. But what I will say is that the one thing that has surprised me the most as a pelvic floor physical therapist is that sex is such a vital role in our lives. And there's birth happens. And I feel like a lot of women lose themselves in the process of that. And there's some that even, I don't know if they quite got to experience intimacy and the beauties of sex in its fullest before they had kids, and then their body feels different. They don't feel connected. And so that is one thing that I have seen over and over. And every time it just hurts my heart because there's answers to fix it. So
I love that so much. And I think that is so true. So would you say you see clients that have painful sex? Yeah.
often. Right now, it's probably about 75% of my patients in the clinic.
And what would you say? I don't know if there is a collective root cause, but is there something like we can pinpoint?
Yeah. There's I'd probably say there's two. The first one I think has more to do with when we have babies. Oftentimes we'll tear or have an episiotomy, and treating our scar tissue, or even working on that scar tissue or massaging that scar, it doesn't get brought up very much. And scar tissue doesn't stay local. It can spread. It has what I like to call the Elsa effect, where it kind of just, like when she does her little Spider-Man thing.
It's like, what?
And so if you think about those tissues during intimacy or with penetration, those tissues are supposed to slide and glide. But if that scar is stuck and is frozen, right, like the Elsa effect, it's going to be painful. So you now have an environment that should like slide and glide, but it's not happening. And I also think it's hard to raise your hand and say, my body does not feel the same after having a baby, but sex is also a problem. I feel like that's kind of hard. And the other part that I see too is that, and you and I think we've talked about this before at some point, but when we experience negative emotion, our pelvic floor tightens up. And so even if you tore a little bit, and then the first time you were intimate after having baby, or maybe you didn't have a great experience, before you got pregnant and had kids, just even your brain thinking, oh gosh, we got to do this again, it's going to be painful. Your body knows, and it will purposely tighten those muscles. So it's kind of this cycle that continues and continues. And I don't want to say it's really easy to break, but the process to break it is very simple.
Oh, so maybe you can share with us maybe a few things that we can do to start breaking that process. And maybe we can incorporate our partners into it and make it fun.
Yeah. And what I'll say, everything that I'll suggest, obviously each woman gets to decide, is this the right thing for me? Because I have some patients that really want to keep like therapy time separate, and they only want to work on it themselves. And then sexy time is sexy time, and it's very separate. I have some women, probably most like myself, where they're like, listen, I don't have that much time. Combine it together. You can do it that way. I've had patients before, and I'll reference that when it comes that they'll have their partner or husband help them, but it's also very, okay, well, this is therapy time and we're watching Friends or The Office. And then now this is sexy time, like hours later or days or weeks later. Now this is sexy time. We're not watching TV. We're just together. So feel free to utilize this and kind of work on it however you need to, which I feel like goes without saying, but I want to make sure that gets said, because this can be such a tough topic to discuss, which I'm so glad you have a podcast talking about these things. But so the first rule that I often will suggest is that anytime you're working on these tissues, or this homework, if you will, is that it's never painful. Because like I said before, when we have that negative emotion, which is pain or being scared or anxious, then you're just giving more ammunition to your brain and those tissues to say, remember, like this was a problem. So we want to, and I know intimacy and like sexy time, like thinking about this from a science point of view can be hard, but the simple part of it is we just want to keep giving evidence. So light touch, whatever you're doing, as long as it's not painful with the homework, I'll suggest that is doing more than what you will think that it's going to do. And I can't tell you how many times I'll get calls or emails or texts like, Pauli, you gave this to me and I'm pretty sure it's not working. And then the next time that we work together, they are significantly further, even though they can't necessarily tell either. But one of the first things that I would say is that I would start with just gentle touch, and that could be externally, all around parts of the labia, all around the opening. And if that feels funny or weird, then maybe even just taking a tampon applicator with the tampon still in it, and make sure you throw it away after every use. That way there's no cross-contamination. We're not introducing bacteria. But you could just even take that tampon applicator. Sometimes that is enough just to remove like my finger from having to touch my own body. That tampon applicator kind of acts as a barrier. So that can be helpful too. And even if you wanted to insert that tampon applicator, and I like to say stretching around the clock, that you're just gently going to stretch, like at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, typically the lower section. So if you were to think like up here is 12 and then down here is 6, that lower half of the clock, that's where I would spend most of your time. But that typically tends to be the areas that tend to be more irritated, especially if you've had a scar or a episiotomy. And so for some, that feels very intimidating, like, oh, well, when I press, I have all this pain. And that's what I said not to do. So if you feel like, okay, I just need to get successful with this, and you work on the upper half of that clock, that might be a better start too. And then people will say, well, how long do I press for? How, like what tension? You decide, again, whatever you're successful with. So it might be, okay, I'm just proud of myself for getting that tampon applicator in, and you can use lube too to help decrease the friction. But I think that that's something that even just feeling successful with putting that in without having pain, that's going to go a really long way, because I think a lot of us are very conditioned. Well, we have this big long to-do list every day. If I'm going to, get better at this, it better be a lot happening. So that's one thing that I would start to do. Another thing is to do some diaphragmatic breathing. I like to call it balloon breathing. I think we've talked about this before. It's the same idea as diaphragmatic breathing, but we're really just calling attention to your pelvic floor. So when you inhale, the lungs should fill with air, diaphragm should drop, your gut should move downward, and then your pelvic floor, all those muscles on the bottom, they should also move downward. And so pairing the balloon breathing and the gently pressing around the clock can get you really far, really, really far on your own.
I love that so much. And then if we wanted to incorporate our partners into this, what would be that next step?
So I would say the first step there is to kind of think about your own relationship. And I'll talk about mine just because I feel like it's easy, and then I'll reference a couple of my patients, but no names, and I'll switch up some of the details. So even if they were listening, they would never know. So I have a history of pelvic pain, and bless my sweet husband. I'm bossy in general, but I also sometimes will have him, he probably would have a stroke if he knew that I'm saying this. Now that I'm thinking about this, he won't listen. It'll be fine. But I've had him help stretch around my clock, if you will. And I personally, because I've seen such a change with women in relationship to their husbands or partners or spouses, there's a power there that I think we underestimate. So I like he doesn't like it when I get really sciencey, like, all right, now I need you to help me stretch my second layer at my puborectal. He hates when I say these things, as if he even knows where to like press. But we just have kind of gotten to the point that I'll say, hey, I need your finger before we start. And that's kind of just been our natural cadence, that he knows, okay, I know that my pelvic floor is kind of tight and it's irritable. So because we have not you and I, my husband, you and I, we have a romantic relationship. And so my body's going to respond really well to him stretching, and sometimes even better than when I do it. And this was first illustrated to me. I had a patient I was working with, and she had said she had never used a tampon. They'd been married like 5 or 6 years. They had never had penetrative sex. And so typically my finger really never hurts working on patients, but my finger lost some blood flow. There was some restriction there because her muscles were so tight. And I never tell anyone to have sex, to not have sex. That's not my role. But she came back the next visit and she said, I did something bad. And I said, oh, what? And she said, my husband and I had sex. And I was like, what? 5 or 6 years? This is amazing. Like I was cheering, and she's like, well, I didn't know if I could. And I'm like, wait a minute, let's back up. My finger hurt the last time, but your body responded so well to your husband. And so I've watched this over the years because I've done it, and I have chills just even thinking about this and relaying that story. But for the past 13 years, I've seen that where in the clinic, because because I'm not married to any of my patients, right, those tissues respond so much better to their husbands and spouses.
No problem. We've all been there. I have my own 3 kids. I totally get it. And so we'll just get Pauline a minute. But I love that she's talking about this because I feel like it's opening such a door to so many women that are scared, that are in pain, that are struggling. And what she's talking about really reminds me of when, I don't know how you gave birth, but when I gave birth, our midwife, we did a whole natural water birth. And so our midwife was all about massaging the perineum, I think is what she called it. And it was like our thing. Like he would help, and I didn't tear at all. And we did that with all 3 of my kids. And it was amazing. And I felt like, I think even in the beginning, it was a little awkward for us to do that. Cause like you said, it wasn't like a sexual thing, especially not with a 9-month belly, but but
So
just
true.
the fact that he could, we use like I think it was pure like almond oil she told us to use. And it was really cool how he and I think he felt like it was something he could do to help me feel better, which and like not help, but made him feel also valuable in this process of giving birth, which is a lot of times, the woman's kind of job. And so it gave him this like also like, yeah, I was part of that kind of deal,
That is amazing. And I think that's such a great illustration of that point, is that there's a connection there that it provides so much more value into so many different components of this. So
Yes.
Yeah, I think our husbands and our spouses or partners, they can help really however you feel comfortable. So they could help, like stretching around the clock. And like I mentioned earlier, I've had some patients that box it up. I had one couple that she wanted to keep therapy time, but she wanted her husband's help. And so they would watch, was it Gilmore Girls? I don't even remember. Something so removed from sexual of any kind. And then when it was sexy time, if you will, obviously the TV wasn't on. And so all their homework, if you will, was removed from that. And so they really liked doing it that way. And I have some patients who like to do the stretching on their own. Almost, I had one patient say this just a couple weeks ago, almost like I suppose somebody could misinterpret this, but almost like an offering, like, see, babe, like I got all my stretching done and now I can show up for you because you've been so patient for me for so long. And I loved how she explained that it was, he had given her the gift of patience, and then she had given him the gift of, being able to tolerate penetrative intercourse. So I think there's so many different ways. And that's why in the beginning I had said, kind of think about your own relationship and see what would fit best. My husband is down for probably anything. It's just how I package it. As long as I am not sciencey and not referencing, muscle groups, he's totally cool with probably anything. And I know that about him. And your husband is, maybe the same or a little bit different. So utilize that relationship and that foundation that you already have to just add more to that relationship and to that level of that physical intimacy.
I love this. And I'm curious, and this came up right now because you were talking, but before I met you, and I'm so lucky I have during the Mompreneur Summit, which you all should join if you're listening. I've never even heard of physical therapy for your pelvic floor. And in my head, like if you have pain in your vagina, you will go to a gynecologist. So the women that listening, which I mean, I'm sure a lot of them don't even know that this kind of service even exists out there. And listening to you talking about it and describing it kind of reminds me of maybe going to a gynecologist in a way, right? And the work that you do but it sounds a lot more personal, not as invasive, maybe not harsh tools.
Right.
Right.
Correct. Yep.
I'm just from how we're talking about it. And so I thought maybe you can actually explain, like, how do women even get to you versus, from a gynecologist? Like what's this How does it work?
I'll be honest, that's a really loaded question, which I really am happy to answer it. So I'll back up just a little bit. So when you go see a gynecologist and they do a pap smear, when they insert the speculum, when you said harsh tools, when they insert that speculum, it actually covers up those pelvic floor muscles, at least the first and the second layer, right? Because they have to move it out of the way so that they can get their swab or their light up to your cervix, right, to do the swab.
Right.
And so so in my opinion, generally across the board, I don't know if gynecologists or OBs, despite the fact that that's the area that they work, I don't know if they really quite understand the pelvic floor to the depth that it is and the level of complexity. And I'm really not trying to like stand on my high horse and say they're doctors and they don't know, but in all reality, that speculum is covering it up and they don't like to be bothered with it, rightfully so, right? Because either the OBs are trying to deliver your baby or your gynecologist is trying to say, okay, what is happening at your uterus or your ovaries, which they got to get stuff out of the way to get up there. So oftentimes if you look at the research, the average, if you're having pelvic floor problems, it takes you about 7 to 8 years to make contact with a pelvic floor PT or get the help you need. Wow. Which is where my panties really get in a bunch, because that is way too dang long. That's too long. So, and then I've also seen so many marriages end in divorce, and they can relate it back to problems in the bedroom. And I don't delve that much into it, but my suspicion is that after kids, anyways, their body didn't return back to the way that the function that it was before. So while there's many really great OBs and gynecologists out there, to some degree, pelvic floor PT is pretty new, but some of them, they all seem to have different opinions about it. In the area that I live, I have an amazing OB, but I've also been very bossy with him. Like, this is how you need to help your patients. And interestingly enough, he'll say, Pauli, they'll come back, and this is not me tooting my own horn, but just an example. He's like, you fix them, but they think I'm the hero because I sent you to them. And I said, I know it didn't even take you more than 2 minutes to say, oh yeah, just go see Pauli or, somebody like me or something. And then as a doctor, right, like the less you have on your plate, the better. To me, it would make sense that they would want to shuffle you out the door to someone who could, dive in and figure out really where the sources and the issues are. So while I try to keep, when I talk about treating the pelvic floor, very medical and very professional, OBs and gynecologists and we have very different scopes of practice. Like we work a little bit differently, but my job is to dive in about the muscles. Their job is to deliver your baby successfully, right? Which, can we get an amen for that? Like that's a huge thing to get the baby here, right?
Right.
But also, or for them to, look for disease or rule out disease, or, that's why they do the pap smear, to ensure that we are, knock on wood, all cancer free and there's no other issues there. So I just think our focuses are a little bit different. But like you said, a lot of us are very well trained. Well, let's go to the doctor. And then if they don't know, then I guess I must be alone in this.
Yeah, and some women that I work with, I do the energy healing work, right, with a lot of women that suffer from sexual trauma. And a lot of times this manifests in physical in their body, right? And I know we talked about this also. And so it's interesting because I have, until I met you, which I'm really lucky, and I feel like obviously it's meant to be, I've never knew that this exists. So I'm so grateful that you're here, because I do believe that so many women need this work. And so many women just kind of like, oh, sex is painful, I'm just not going to do it, and shut that window, but not aware of how much of their power and, how much of who they are is in that vagina. Like, I call it your source. This is your powerhouse, right? And if you cut that off, you cut you off. And that is really just heartbreaking. So I'm just like bowing to you and to the work that you do, because I feel like it's transforms lives. I know it does.
Yeah, you're so right in this. And it's always been interesting to me that whether it's like a martyrdom place that it's really easy to hang out in, or that victim mentality, like, well, I had the babies and they wrecked me.
Yeah.
It's also one of those, like, if you gave birth and your bicep muscle, for example, was like damaged, you would speak up about it and the whole world would say, girl, we need to get this bicep going, right? Because how are you going to carry the diaper bag? How are you going to carry your baby? How are you going to carry the infant carrier? How are you going to carry the groceries in from, right? There's all these things that your bicep does. But I think because we can see it and we can see the lack, it's very easy to bring that up, rather than it's very easy to, like, our pelvic floor muscles, they're in such a intimate place that, you, your doctor, and your partner, spouse, or husband are really the only people that have sometimes me, have access to it. And so to speak up about that, like, I think some people might feel it's kind of off-putting, and it's just easier to put it, like you said, down. And I can't even speak on your topic, but one of my patients told me the other day that one of our chakras is right in that region or something.
It is. It's the sacral chakra.
Sacral. Okay. Yeah. I won't even pretend to know, but she mentioned that to me, and I can't even speak on it, but you probably could. But as she kept talking about it, I thought, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense, because one of the things I'll often say about my patients, and I would never do this, is that when they first come in to see me, like, just how their face looks, their lack of glow, and I'm not talking, right, because they're tired with kids or whatever, compared to by the time they get done, which again, I would never take a before picture or an after picture of their face, but just their face changes, the things that they're doing in life. Like, it's so interesting to me to see them, like, they almost, like, sounds terrible to say, like, their life is back together. And I'm not saying that I'm taking responsibility for that. I'm just, call it, right, the sacral chakra. Maybe that helps align. I don't know how that works. There's something that happens. Maybe you can tell me more about that. But it just permeates into so many parts of their life. And you work with women, and so you know the power behind each woman. When she can shine her light, she's unstoppable, right? Like, so
I call it the diamond status, because in the that's how I call it. When in the metaphysical world, we talk about the mind, body, soul pyramid, and I say it's mind, body, soul source. So it's a diamond. It's not a pyramid, right? It's a diamond shape. And when you actually go down and you heal this and reconnect it, you're in your diamond status. You can shine. And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. And like, anatomically too, the way that the pelvis is kind of, it is like a diamond.
Really?
Okay.
What is that? That's amazing.
Yeah, right. Because then you want to start, like, talking about, is it analogies, or, like, there's so much value in diamonds.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's, but that worth is already there. It's already inherent because it's a diamond, right? Like, even though the diamond might be, like, covered up, I don't even know how they mine diamonds.
Exactly. But when a diamond is mined, it's like a black rock, and they really have to polish it. And it is the strongest substance on our planet. Like, they use diamonds to cut other metals. And so it's so strong and so resilient. And so when you step into that, which is when you actually connect to that and you heal, whatever is going on there, you can really reconnect, because so many of us have, like, we just disconnect that part. And a lot of times, yes, sexual trauma, rape, whatever, but that's why I also considered having a really bad childbirth as sexual trauma. You're right. Your sexual organs are in trauma. Being in this reality as a woman, being constantly judged on how you need to look, how you need to be. You're too sexual. You're not sexual enough. That can be sexual trauma for somebody, because they are closed off and disconnected from who they are. And that is our source. We come from here. We birth from here. our creativity, our ideas, it all comes from there. And so a lot of women, when they give birth and then they have the baby blues or the postpartum depression, I believe a lot of time it's because the baby is coming up and it's bringing up all these things because the baby wants you to be healed. The baby wants you to be in your power, right? The baby wants a mom that is strong and powerful to take care of it. And so I believe all this stuff comes up and happens for a reason. But having Pauli there to help you right away and not 10 years down the road when you're divorced and unhappy and not satisfied, because that's what happens. We just think like, I'm broken. Nobody can fix me. There's nobody to talk to. And I think this is magic because what you're doing is magic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And so, okay, so we're going to share all the links, of course, so people can find you and hopefully sooner than later if they need, because like you said, we just don't talk about it. And I can tell you, like, I've never, with all the midwives I've been to, and, I've never even heard of physical therapy for my pelvic floor. So I think, and I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Right.
And I know I have girlfriends that did tear and childbirth. I know they were just told, just do your Kegels, like you said. So I love that you said no Kegel University, because that's exactly what this is about. And that's what they say, do your Kegels and kind of shut up and deal with it, where here you are with a solution, which I think is amazing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's, I often joke, like I paid good money to trademark that name, No Kegels University, because that is how much I believe in it. So yeah. So, my Instagram, it's Beyond the V period by BY Pauli, Pauli. My website is one word, no period, Beyond the V by Pauli.com. I have a YouTube channel where so all the videos that are there currently at the time of this, they're all actually based on pain with sex. And so if you want more help, I think there's at least 12 videos on there. So it's another really great way to get started on things. But my website, Instagram, and YouTube is Beyond the V, Beyond the V with Pauli, maybe. And I have a podcast, Beyond the V with Pauli. The withs and the buys, maybe I should have cleaned that up a little bit better, but if you search for it, it'll come up. But all the links are on Instagram or my website, so you'll be able to find it through there. And I like answering questions too. So
yes. And like I mentioned before, Pauli is one of our guest speakers in the Mompreneur Summit. So if you're watching this later in life, maybe you'll get access to it. I guess not, but we will have all her links here as well, so you can find her and access her and reach her and her magic. So I really want to say thank you for what you do, for everything you're doing for women, and for creating a world where women can have unpainful sex, enjoyable sex, fun sex, and reconnect with their husband. That's what we're about. And I'm just honored that you're here. So
thank you for listening to today's episode. If this was a contribution to you, please share, like, love, and comment. I would love to hear from you more, and make sure to follow us on Morph Healing. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and remember, you are here for a reason. I see you. Love, more.